The Svatara Upanishad says, "No Maya as Prakriti and Brahman associated with Maya as the great Ishvara, who imparts existence and consciousness to it and guides it. It is he who creates the world." The Aitareya Upanishad says that before creation there was Atman alone, and he thought, "Let me create the world," and then he created the world by his will. The Taittiriya Upanishad says that from the self, or Brahman, alone arose in succession the whole creation, including Akasha, air, fire, water, earth, vegetation, food, and bodies. The Taittiriya Upanishad says that desiring, "I shall be many, so I shall create," the Lord meditated and thus created the world. The Chandogya Upanishad says that before creation, Brahman, or the self alone, existed, and that his nature was pure existence. He desired to become manifold and created all things, including fire, water, food, and beings born of eggs, and so forth. The Mundaka Upanishad says that just as sparks emanate from a blazing fire, so from immutable Brahma arose different animate and inanimate things. It is also said that before its manifestation, the whole world existed in Brahman in a potential form. Then, assuming name and form, it came into being as Virata. From Virat came into being the ancient lawgivers, human beings, cattle, horses, goats, and so on, both male and female, down to the ants. Thus says the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. According to these Shrutis, Brahman or Atman himself, assuming manifold forms as the Jivas, entered into these bodies. A Jiva is so called because it upholds vitality, the pranas, in a body. The substratum, or the pure consciousness, the subtle body, and the reflection of pure consciousness on the subtle body, these three together constitute a Jiva. Maya of the great Ishvara has, like its power of creation, another power which deludes all. It is this power which deludes the Jiva. The Jiva, thus deluded to believe himself to be powerless and identified with a body, becomes subject to grief. There is described in brief the duality created by Ishvara. In the Saptana Brahmana of the Veda, there is a description of the duality created by the Jiva. By action and reflection, the Jiva creates 7 kinds of food, the objects on experience. 1 kind is met for men, 2 for the celestial beings, the 4th for the lower animals, and the remaining 3 for the self. Thus the food is divided. Grains such as wheat are for men. The ingredients of the full moon and the new moon sacrifices are for the devas. Milk is for the lower animals, and the mind, the speech, and the vital ears are for the self. These are the 7 kinds of food. Though all these objects are in themselves created by Ishvara, still, by action and reflection, the Jiva has converted them into his objects of enjoyment. Hence, they are said to be his creation. As they are created by Ishvara and become objects of experience and enjoyment for the Jiva, so they are related to both, just as a woman is related both to the parents who brought her into being and to the husband who loves her. In the actual creation of the objects, the modifications or functions of Maya, the power of the Lord are the cause, whereas for the actual enjoyment of those objects, it is the modifications or functions of the inner organs of the Jivas that are responsible. Objects created by Ishvara do not alter. They remain the same. The gems may affect different people differently according to their mental states. One man may feel happy on obtaining a gem, whereas another may feel disappointed at failing to obtain it, and a man uninterested in it may only look on and feel neither happy nor disappointed. The Jiva creates these 3 feelings of happiness, disappointment, or indifference with regard to the gem. But the nature of the gem as created by Ishvara remains the same throughout. Through personal relationships, one and the same woman appears differently as a wife, a daughter-in-law, a sister-in-law, a cousin, and a mother, but she herself remains unchanged. Objection: These different relationships may be seen, but no changes in the woman's appearances are seen to result from other people's ideas about her. Reply: not so. The woman has a subtle body as well as a physical body composed of flesh. Although other people's ideas about her may not affect her physical body, yet they can change her mental state. Objection: though it may affect the objects perceived in the states of delusion, dreaming, remembering, and imagining, the mind cannot affect the objects perceived through the senses in the waking state. Reply: true. Acharya Shankara, Sureshwara, and others acknowledge the fact that the mind assumes the form of the external object with which it comes into contact and modifies that form to suit its purposes. Sri Shankara says that just as melted copper assumes the form of the mold into which it is cast, so the mind assumes the form of the object perceived by it. Or just as sunlight assumes the forms of the objects which it illumes, so the mind assumes the forms of the objects which it perceives. Sri Sureshwara holds, out of the cognizer, the jiva, cognition, and appropriate modification of the mind is produced. Thus born, the modification proceeds towards the object of cognition until it gets into touch with the object, when it assumes the form of the object, which is known as the cognition of the object. So we see there are two kinds of objects, the material and the mental. The material is the object cognized by mind being modified by the form of the material object. And the mental is cognized by the witness consciousness as the jiva being affected by the material coming in contact with the mind and invoking its latent desire for enjoyment. By the application of the double method of agreement and difference, we come to the conclusion that it is the mental creation which causes bondage to the jiva. For when these mental objects are there, pleasure and pain are also there. When they are not, there is neither pleasure nor pain. In dream, when external material objects are absent, man is bound by the intellect to pleasure and pain, although outer objects are not perceived. In deep sleep, in a faint, and in the lower samadhi, when the mental functions are temporarily suspended, no pleasure or pain is felt in spite of the proximity of outer objects. A liar told a man whose son had gone to a far-off country that the boy was dead, although he was still alive. The father believed him and was aggrieved. If, on the other hand, his son had really died abroad, but no news had reached him, he would have felt no grief. This shows that the real cause of a man's bondage is his own mental world. Objection: this amounts to pure idealism, and it deprives external objects of all significance. Reply: no. Because we accept the fact that external objects give shape to the modifications of the mind which create the mental world. Or we may admit that external objects serve little useful purpose, yet we cannot dispense with them altogether. In any case, cognition is concerned with the existence of objects and not with their utility. Objection: if the mind causes bondage by giving rise to the phenomenal world, the world could be made to disappear by controlling the mind. So only yoga needs to be practiced. What is the necessity of knowledge of Brahman? Reply: though by controlling the mind, duality can be made to disappear temporarily, the complete and final destruction of the mental creation is not possible without a direct knowledge of Brahman. This is proclaimed by the Vedanta. The duality of Ishvara, creation, may continue, but the non-dualist, when conceived of its illusiveness, can nonetheless know the secondless Brahman. When all duality disappears at the time of the dissolution of the universe, the secondless Atman still remains unknown, because then, as in deep sleep, there is no teacher and no scripture, though there may be absence of duality. The world of duality created by Ishvara is rather a help than an obstacle to a direct knowledge of the non-duality. Moreover, we cannot destroy the creation, so let it be. Why are you so much opposed to it? The world of duality created by Jiva is of two kinds, that which conforms and that which does not conform with the scriptural injunctions. The former should be kept in mind until Brahman is realized. Reflection on the nature of the self as Brahman is the mental world that conforms with the scriptural injunctions. Even this duality in conformity with the scripture is to be renounced after Brahman is realized. This is the direction of the Shruti. An intelligent person who has studied the scriptures and had repeatedly practiced what they enjoin should renounce them after knowing the supreme Brahman, just as a man throws aside a flaming torch at the end of his journey. Amritananda Upanishad. An intelligent person who has studied the scriptures and has practiced what they enjoin should discard them after experiencing Brahman as his self, just as a man discards the husk when he has found the grain. Amrita Bindu Upanishad. A wise man, having experienced Brahman as his self, should keep his higher intuitive faculty, prajna, united with Brahman. He should not oppress his mind with many words, for they are a mere waste of energy. It has been clearly told in Shruti, know that one and give up other talks. Mundaka Upanishad. And a wise man should restrain his speech and keep it within the mind. Katha Upanishad. The duality of the mental creation of man, which is not in conformity with the scripture, is of two kinds, violent and dull. That which gives rise to lust, anger, and other passions is called violent, and that which gives rise to daydreams is called dull. Before starting the study into the nature of Brahman, it is necessary to give up both, for mental poise and concentration are the two prerequisites for the study of Brahman. So says the Shruti. In order to achieve and be established in the state of liberation, these two must be given up. One who is subject to the urges of lust and other passions is unfit for liberation in life. You may say, let there be no liberation in life. I am satisfied if there is no birth anymore. We reply, then if desires remain, you will have births also. So be satisfied with heaven only. If you say that the pleasures of heaven are defective, having waning and gradation, and so are to be renounced, then why don't you give up this source of all evils, the passions? If cherishing the false idea that you have attained liberation, you do not completely give up these passions, you transgress the laws of the scriptures and are self-willed. Sri Sureshwara says that one who pretends to be a knower of Brahman and yet lives without moral restraint is like a dog that eats unclean things. Before knowledge, you suffered only from the pain of your own mental imperfections, but now you suffer the censor of the world as well. How glorious is the effect of your knowledge! Oh, knower of truth, do not sink to the level of pigs in the sty, freeing yourself from all the defects arising from your mind. Be worshipped by the world like a god. The scriptures dealing with liberation proclaim that these urges of passions can be overcome by thinking over the fettering nature of the objects of desire. Adopt these means, conquer the passions, and be happy. Objection. All right. Let defects such as the impact of passions be removed. But what is the harm in letting the imagination play on the objects of desire? Reply. Such mental preoccupation with the objects of desire is the very seed of all evils. So says Lord Krishna. If a man dwells mentally on any object of desire, he will become attached to it. Attachment gives rise to a longing for it, and the frustration of desire leads to anger. From anger comes delusion, and from delusion the loss of memory. From loss of memory comes the ruin of discrimination, and from the ruin of discrimination the man perishes. This tendency of thinking on objects may be overcome by meditation on the attributeless Brahman. This can be gradually be done at ease by first meditating on Ishvara. One who has understood intellectually the nature of the secondless Brahman and who is free from the defects of intellect should live in solitude and over a long period practice the japa of Om and thus control the vagaries of the mind. When the mental world is thus conquered, other modifications of the mind gradually cease. The mind keeps mum like a dumb person. This method was variously explained by Vasistha to Rama. With the direct knowledge of the unsubstantiality of the phenomenal world arises the profound bliss of nirvana. A steady and concentrated study of these scriptures and discussion on the truth with the teacher and other learned persons lead to the conviction that the calm of deep reflection born of the disappearance of the last vestiges of desires and passions is the highest state. If sometimes, owing to actions performed in previous births, the mind of a reflective man is distracted by desire, then it may be brought back to a peaceful state by the constant practice of spiritual meditations. That man, whose mind is not subject to distraction, is not merely a knower of Brahman, but Brahman itself, So declares the sages versed in the scriptures of Vedanta. One whose mind does no longer dwell on whether he knows Brahman or not, but one who remains identified with pure consciousness or knowledge is not merely a knower of Brahman, but Brahman itself. This liberation in life is the final step attained by sublating or removing the mental creations of the jiva. So, we have described how the duality created by the jiva differs from that created by Ishvara.